Hello and welcome back to On the Brink. Today's episode is brought to you by Copper and Aave. Let's start with Copper. It's the global provider of blockchain infrastructure solutions for institutional investors who are actively trading digital assets. Its award-winning custody application is connected to 25 of the largest exchanges in the world, ensuring safe storage and movement of assets for the biggest crypto hedge funds, market makers, family offices, and high net worth individuals. Their clear loop system is the first off-exchange settlement network for digital assets. It's the safest way to trade balances in custody across multiple exchanges without requiring on-chain settlement, on-chain movement of assets. To learn more, visit copper.co or reach out on Twitter at copperhq. This show is also brought to you by Aave, A-A-V-E. Aave is an open source and non-custodial liquidity protocol where users can earn interest on deposits and borrow digital assets. It's a decentralized, community-governed protocol. Learn more about Aave at aave.com. So today I'm sitting down with Nicholas Gregory, who is the CEO of CommerceBlock. CommerceBlock is probably best known for their work with Mainstay, which is a Bitcoin sidechain, with DGLD, the gold-backed stablecoin project, uses to anchor itself to Bitcoin. They've recently created an implementation of Statechains called Mercury. And what Statechains is a way to trade private keys or UTXOs to send them without making an on-chain transaction. So you can think of Statechain transactions as virtual opendimes, effectively taking Bitcoin and turning it back into a Chaumian style cash system with specific denominations of coins. There's a lot more to it than that. We'll get into it in the episode. Let's dive right in. Here's Nicholas Gregory.
Brought down by bad mortgage investments, Lehman, which has 25,000 employees, will be liquidated.
The federal government loans American International Group, AIG, $85 billion.
This is a different kind of market, and the Fed is asleep.
The federal government is stepping in to stabilize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two mortgage giants that have been threatened by the housing crisis.
The Bank of England has pumped £75 billion more into Britain's ailing economy with a new round of quantitative easing.
You print a couple $1 trillion, and all of a sudden, people start to worry. So out of this worry, we have something called the Bitcoin.
Well, Nicholas Gregory, you are the CEO of CommerceBlock, and we're here to talk about Statechains. Very exciting, and your new project, Mercury. But before that, you were telling me before we started recording some pretty funny stuff about your history with martial arts. So maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, about CommerceBlock, and then we can dive into that.
Yeah, so I'm British, obviously, but I did live a significant period of my time in New York and kind of got into Bitcoin while I had a community there around 2012. And around 2015-16 founded CommerceBlock. Originally, we were kind of doing OTC software for people in the Bitcoin community, and that kind of evolved to building sidechains. We built a protocol called Mainstay. We built a sidechain for gold-backed token called GTSA, and recently we've spent the last year looking at kind of layer 2 solutions with Bitcoin and very much focusing on something called Statechains, which was a paper written by Ruben Samsam a few years ago. It's significantly different than his paper, mainly because his paper focused on things like L2, which aren't really available yet, but we are kind of code complete, but we have a lot of UI bugs and stuff, but we're hoping to be ready for a soft launch by June. Hopefully we have some people going to Bitcoin Miami that we're hoping that they will be in a position to present it. So that's where we are with that.
So you were telling me that you had a past career as a martial artist. Is that correct?
Kind of. I mean, I did teach in New York, Wing Chun, and I don't know, over the years, I'm more of a fan. Like I did 2008, had a bit of a midlife crisis and spent a couple of month and a half training in the Shaolin area of China, which was great. I think the following year, I did something similar in Thailand and did Muay Thai. Just really a hobbyist who likes kind of traveling and training in exotic places and being switched off from the world and just training 8 hours a day. I don't do that as much now. I get a bit older, have a little daughter as well. But yeah, and then when I arrived in New York in 2010, I wasn't really a fan of the martial art culture, kind of traditional martial arts. It was very much bowing and wearing traditional clothes. So I kind of started a little school, and that became kind of fairly big. Became bigger once I left, which is weird, but yeah, it still goes on. I'm not really involved in that at the moment. I kind of switched a few years ago and focused more on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I kind of like the culture. I still train that at the moment.
So, we, is it accurate to say that you founded a fight club in New York? That's kind of how you described it to me before.
Yeah, so there's something called the Wing Chun Brotherhood, which, funny enough, a guy from your area of the world, Boston, he was this Boston boxer. He went out and challenged a lot of Kung Fu guys to fights. I randomly said, yeah, why not? And then it was on YouTube. And then from that, we ended up having these sparring sessions and became quite big. And they still do it now. So it's not fighting, but it's rather than just doing shapes, forms, and avoiding contact. It was just a bit more free for flow. And bear in mind, this was in New York when UFC and MMA were actually banned in New York. So you weren't legally allowed to do that. So I think that law changed around 2015, 16. So this is why this kind of existed.
So an underground bootleg fight club.
I wouldn't say it was underground. I mean, there's you can find videos of it. I mean, they were on I'd say the north side of Central Park, or a few were in Jamaica, Queens. It was fun.
So you didn't attempt to conceal your speakeasy fight club?
Well, it was sparring, so it was technically fine.
Okay. And you told me that there's a very interesting Bitcoin intersection here. Tell us about that.
So one day I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a school in New York, which is quite famous, Marcelo Garcia's. And one day I was in the showers, with other men, as you do. And one of the black belts there was kind of like joking about how someone paid for him in Bitcoin and blah blah blah, and wasn't too happy about it. I paid for a private class, so and people knew me that I was involved in Bitcoin then, and I ended up going onto his wallet, which was literally probably a password-like password on blockchain.com, and it turned out there was a significant amount of Bitcoin there, and it turns out the private student was Roger Ver himself. So, and this black belt was pretty happy about the outcome. And this was in 2015, 16, so it's probably even more now. So, but it seems that Mr. Ver was training quite seriously with some.
Do you know what Roger's discipline is from a martial arts perspective?
Oh, I mean, I barely. I mean, the coach was a guy called Paul Schreider, who's quite a well-known coach. He told me Roger came a few times and paid for private lessons, but I think at the time he was a brown belt. But he said he was pretty serious, pretty intense guy.
Who would you back in a BJJ fight competition between yourself and Roger Ver? Who would you?
I mean, Roger Ver's very much a higher level than myself. I'm still learning BJJ. I'm still quite a few belts below.
So the most expensive BJJ lesson of all time, probably.
Definitely, for sure.
Love it. So you've had an interesting journey with CommerceBlock. I guess the unifying theme has been sidechains, or I don't know if maybe sidechains is the right word, but overlay networks which reference the underlying Bitcoin network. They sit on top of Bitcoin, but they give you different transactional assurances. So maybe let's just revisit Mainstay. Tell us a little bit about that and the idea behind that system.
Yes, and Mainstay is really, it's a kind of, I think the concept was originally designed by Peter Todd, kind of like a single-use sealed set. So essentially it's a way of aggregating proofs into a Merkle tree and then building on succinct commits into the Bitcoin blockchain. So unlike open timestamps, which are kind of like writes, but they're kind of not kind of wired together, we would write into the Bitcoin blockchain kind of like, but on the previous commit. So if you had a document, for example, and you wanted proof of that document existing at certain points in time, you could take a hash of that, put that into the Merkle tree that we build, and then we write that into the Bitcoin blockchain. But we would keep all the commitments of that document. So if that document was changed in between, it wouldn't necessarily be valid. And the reason we came up with this is we were building this gold-black sidechain, which I mentioned, but we wanted to kind of like preserve its history and keep proof of its history. So we used this kind of like Mainstay concept, and it's still live. And it's called Mainstay.xyz. We have people at the moment that are always speaking to us to do proof of concepts. And we do use it as well. Potentially, we are potentially going to use it for Mercury, the state chain that we're building, and we do have integrations with it with Dropbox, Google Drive, and I think one other. I think the Microsoft plugin as well. So, and we've had various law firms, etc., that want to kind of do POCs on it. We're not really actively marketing it, but it still exists, and it's been well so far.
So to contrast something like open timestamps, open timestamps basically hashes a lot of information together for sort of efficiency's sake, and then it sort of periodically uploads the root hash to Bitcoin and effectively proves that certain information existed at a certain point in time without even necessarily, revealing what the information is, so that at a subsequent time you can go back and reveal the existence. Maybe it's a patent or a new idea that you wanted to, demonstrate to the world existed, and Bitcoin is the clock, that shows that it existed at a certain point in time. Whereas Mainstay is a little bit different. It proves, is it fair to say that it proves unique information existed at a certain point in time?
Yeah, so with open timestamps, obviously there's no linkage between the writes. So if you write something into open timestamp today and then make another write tomorrow, there could be many kind of like mutations in between that wouldn't be reflected. I think the whole concept of Mainstay is that you have like one permanent proof, and we do the similar aggregation. So one Bitcoin transaction can have up to hundreds of thousands of commitments. And you're not storing the data, you're kind of validating the data. So you use the hash of Mainstay to validate the hash that you want to preserve. But yeah, so it's kind of like, you could think of it of open timestamps, but kind of linked. So we build on the previous transaction each time. And, we aggregate this all, so it's very kind of efficient on the Bitcoin blockchain.
And DGLD, you actually power this gold-backed stablecoin. Is that correct?
So that's basically a sidechain. We forked the Elements code base, and which was created by Blockstream, and we made a lot of changes to that to work with a gold-backed asset. So things like there's no transaction. The transaction fees on it are paid by gold. There's no underlying asset like BTC or Ethereum, I think, and they run their own kind of federation. And then we have these kind of commitments onto Mainstay that happen every hour. And that preserves the history of that gold-backed sidechain, so it can't be ever changed. None of the transaction history is kind of locked in on Bitcoin.
So, aside from Blockstream, you guys have been some of the most active in terms of creating sidechains on Bitcoin, and yet, interestingly, sidechains are still not a huge part of the Bitcoin narrative today. Like, they definitely were in sort of 2015, 16. Everyone was really excited by them. Then, of course, like we have other systems that refer into Bitcoin, like Blockstack today, for instance. And then you have like quote unquote merge mine side chains like Rootstock, which are like maybe getting a little bit of traction. But for whatever reason, like it seems like the side chain narrative has like, some of the air has gone out of that balloon. What do you ascribe that to? I mean, you've had a front row seat to this the whole time.
Well, I think the initial promise of sidechains is that they would be, kind of trustless. But I think the original paper talked about having these kind of, the original paper required changes to the Bitcoin protocol to support these SPV proofs, so that you could support basically gather kind of like proof of work of the sidechain itself, and that could be kind of like merged into the original Bitcoin blockchain. That clearly didn't happen. I think, post that paper, we obviously had the SegWit wars. So the idea of changing anything on the Bitcoin protocol is quite, I don't think we're going to see massive changes like that. So the sidechains you see at the moment do rely on essentially a multi-sig federation. That's essentially the way Liquid is. And I'm not familiar with Rootstock. I did look at them years ago. I met Sergio in New York, but they as well, they wanted this kind of power peg, which I think uses a federation. And arguably, I mean, this might sound controversial, but Ethereum is like a Bitcoin sidechain with its wrapped BTC. And I think Bitcoin has found its way into other chains via these kind of wrapping mechanisms. Now, these wrapping mechanisms are still, I wouldn't call them trustless. If anything, they're just a multi-sig. And, I think these other sidechains may have done better in terms of the tooling for developers. I mean, sidechains are quite hard to code against. You're coding against Bitcoin script, which is not a nice JavaScript-like language. So I think that's probably a lot of it to do with it.
Yeah. So interestingly, speaking of Ethereum, if you look at the last few months on Ethereum, these roll-ups have been getting a lot of traction. And as far as I can tell, some of them do rely on these SPV, like fraud-proof assumptions, which were the ones that were rejected in the Bitcoin community when we realized, when we were contemplating sidechains. So what do you make of that? I mean, is it like risky to pare down, the trustlessness required to use these things? Or is it just a matter of, well, they're experimenting and maybe it's worth experimenting with sidechains like that?
I think it's just a different culture. I mean, Ethereum tends to go with things, take the risk. They're a bit more centralized. They can make changes if things go wrong. And, I think the Bitcoin culture changed a lot after SegWit 2x, where it's become a lot more hardened. There's a lot more adversity when it comes to changing it. I mean, if you look at Taproot, that's arguably not a big change, but there's been quite hard debate about changing that. And maybe that's one of Bitcoin's strengths. I mean, I'm, as someone who holds Bitcoin, if Bitcoin ends up, if the layers on top of Bitcoin end up other blockchains and Bitcoin becomes this hardened layer, which is somewhat ossified, I don't necessarily see it as a negative thing. It's just, it's evolved in a way that, it's just evolved in that way. I mean, we're still quite away from having a Solidity type JavaScript language working on top of Bitcoin. And it may make sense to never even have that. So
Nick, you're a Bitcoiner, you're a longtime Bitcoiner, but you're also, I'd say like pretty open-minded. Would you say that there are actual technological learnings to be taken from specifically Ethereum, or did we know everything that there was to know about blockchains, in 2012 from Bitcoin Talk discussions? Like, have we learned anything new from watching Ethereum's experience in the last 5 years?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a Bitcoin maximalist by any means of that concept, but I think Ethereum did a great job of creating a kind of like a developer community. And I don't know if it was good marketing or was it the tooling like Metapart Mask and Infura, but they obviously found something. And prior to Ethereum, there were things like Counterparty. I tried to get involved into Counterparty. There were colored coins, but there were never. I mean, colored coins was I was a fan of that, but there was never consistent spec, and there was never consistent tooling. And I think Ethereum came with this kind of marketing machine, and they were able to get developers en masse. Which how many real Bitcoin developers are there in the world? 10, 50, somewhere in that between. There's probably 1,000 Ethereum guys. So, and that's kind of where they've had success, but it may not end up being to the detriment of Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's projection has done perfectly fine, and they've brought in people that would probably never have been Bitcoin developers in the first place anyway. So it's not necessarily a negative. In terms of technology, I don't think it's really added anything to Bitcoin, but I think other blockchains have. I mean, I'm a fan of Monero. I wouldn't want to see Monero type privacy in Bitcoin because that would potentially hinder the 21 million. But I think product blockchains like that have added and have shown us things that we potentially haven't seen. And there's others. I think I've told you I'm a fan of Decred as well, but I think there is a lot of that as well.
Yeah, so a recurring theme here is privacy, obviously, and this is a good segue into our next topic here, Statechains. So maybe before that, let's do a quick preamble on the privacy tools available on Bitcoin today. So there's like a couple, I guess, big classes of privacy tools, systems to acquire transactional privacy. Do you want to just give us like a very quick rundown of them and sort of how effective they are and like what the constraints are on those systems?
Yeah, so I mean, the first real type of privacy is people using either a centralized mixer or something like BISC, which is a kind of like non-custodial exchange. With a centralized mixer, you are losing, essentially custody of your funds, and they are somewhat illegal. So you're essentially sending your Bitcoin onto a website. The Bitcoin is held by a server, and you just hope that a different type of Bitcoin comes out. Very easy to use. From everything I've read, majority of privacy is actually done on decentralized mixers. I think one of them recently got took down a few days ago, called Bitcoin Fog or something.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
But they are custodial, comes with a lot of risk, but they have huge volumes because they solve the ease of use. Then you have a lot of people that simply go onto BISC and maybe swap into Monero, do some transactions, Monero, come back out. Kind of that's a bit clunky to use, a lot of work. And then you have the kind of CoinJoins processes. You have things like Join Market, which I think was the original one. Can't say I know much. And then you have Wasabi and Samurai. And they basically both act as coordinators who basically, you kind of notify them that you have X amount of Bitcoin, and they coordinate the generation of a script, which all members of that join basically publish to the Bitcoin blockchain. And that kind of mixes your outputs. So, and they have, I mean, there's obviously, if you follow Twitter, if you follow Samurai and Wasabi, they have different philosophies on how they do that. Don't necessarily like each other, but they're essentially building this kind of coin join where they're non-custodial. They create a coordination service. All your Bitcoin go in, an output is done, and your Bitcoin is mixed. And the challenge with that is they are detectable by exchanges. So you occasionally might see something where Binance don't take an output because it came from a coin join. So with that approach, you are creating a kind of a two-tiered type of Bitcoin. You have clean Bitcoin, which comes from lovely clean exchanges like Coinbase and Kraken, and then you have this dirty Bitcoin. And that's the issue kind of with CoinJoin at the moment.
Yeah, it's odd that, I mean, I guess that's the nature of Bitcoin. Obviously, you can look back in the history of some Bitcoins that are being deposited on an exchange, and it's very easy to see that historically there has been a coin join associated with that Bitcoin. I don't see anything, morally reprehensible about doing a coin join. It's basically the same thing as taking a bar of gold and melting it down, mixing it with another bar of gold, and then, getting some new bars of gold out of that. You're just mixing up the atoms. And
if we're going to create a circular economy with Bitcoin, I don't think it's feasible that wherever I spend my Bitcoin, the recipient of my Bitcoin knows my history.
Right.
That's probably why most people use these things.
It's funny that we apply the standard of traceability to Bitcoin. It's considered normal when I got right here in my wallet a analog physical token, aka cash, where there's no transactional history associated with it whatsoever. There's no metadata. There's no way to tell what the last 10 transactions were with this dollar bill. It could have been for super illegal stuff, and I would never know. The 7-Eleven where I'm going to go spend this, buy sugar-free Red Bull, is never going to know. So we have a completely disparate standard for physical
Likewise,
cash.
if you were to send me money via PayPal, it'd be pretty hard for me to know what you're doing on your PayPal account. Things like PayPal have pretty good privacy.
Why would you, as the recipient of my transaction, even want to know or believe that I had a duty to inform you about my prior 10 transactions? That is not the way we reason about cash in society. That's like a completely blown up standard of of surveillance. And if you actually think about it, the cash is not doing anything illegal. If someone, 10 transactions prior to me with $100 bill is using that cash to buy Coke or something, how does that reflect on me? Like, that's not my, that says nothing about my behavior. That's just, so the cash isn't criminal. It's the criminal activity, which is criminal, and somehow we've entered this new regime where now the cash itself is being sanctioned. And so if you have your CoinJoin and your Bitcoin history, now the Bitcoin somehow is tainted, which is definitely not the way that we actually think about cash, which always, it's kind of a crazy thing that the goalposts have shifted so much. So that's CoinJoin. CoinJoin, you say, is like slightly less popular than centralized mixers, but it's still quite popular, actually, right? Like, it's something a lot of people do. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know the exact volumes, but they're pretty huge. I mean, both Wasabi and Samurai, I think they publish their transactions. They're considerable. Yeah,
but it's also kind of easy to trip up, right? Like, there's a bunch of trapdoors and ways to make mistakes with CoinJoin so that it's not effective. Is that, not that I'm fudding CoinJoin, but that's kind of my understanding, is there's a few ways to obviate the usefulness of that procedure.
Yeah, I mean, people can DDoS the anonymity set. I mean, if the majority of those coins are coming from a nefarious actor or a state agency, if the anonymity set is majority of that person, they could probably decompose that CoinJoin. I mean, I think that's some of the debate that's happened between Wasabi and Samurai. Privacy is not a switch. It's a bit of work. There's no perfect privacy, so I think it's always going to be a lot of work in that sense.
And if the CIA or FinCEN or whatever is like 49 outputs in a 50 output CoinJoin, and you're the last one, then you're not getting any privacy from that.
Yeah. But that would be the same with Monero. I mean, I think Monero forces you to do 11 mixes. If 10 of those kind of block, miners are always the NSA's transactions, then they can narrow it down pretty easy.
That's right. And the other thing is, of course, fees. Like, CoinJoins, repeated rounds of CoinJoins can get expensive, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So
I think both of them.
What about CoinSwap? Is that different?
Yeah, so CoinSwap essentially swaps your coins. So in our case, because maybe it helps if I talk about the way Statechains works, but with Statechains, we essentially we found a layer 2 way of transferring private keys, UTXOs. So by applying coin swaps, we're essentially putting all our private keys into a jar, shaking it a few times, pulling them out. Because this is somewhat off-chain, there's no cost. And also there's no kind of on-chain kind of printing, because you're essentially just swapping a UTXO. Now, obviously, there's pluses there in that you can swap as many times as you want. There's not an on-chain cost. But if, say, one of the coins coming in were tainted, and say we had a swap, you swapped with 20 people, potentially one of those 20 could end up with a dirty coin. Whereas if it was a CoinJoin of 20, essentially that taint goes across all the 20 members. But we still think there's positives there, because if you were the unlucky person to end up with the tainted coin, we do kind of like commitments into the Bitcoin blockchain using a kind of what we call sparse Merkle tree, which is what we mentioned with Mainstay. So if you were the unlucky person that went to, say, your exchange and they said, look, you have a dirty coin now, you could prove that you did a coin swap on Mercury or with us. So you could say, well, this coin may have been used for terrorist financing, but I did do a coin swap. It's proven in the Bitcoin blockchain. So I'm not doing, that state is not valid. And then you'd only have a 1 in 20 chance of that happening anyway. So we hope that would kind of solve that.
This is pretty fascinating. So we're decoupling the ownership of Bitcoin from the blockchain record itself, from the public-private key relationship to that Bitcoin.
Yeah, so the way to think of Statechains is like virtual opendimes. Yeah, I mean, opendimes are essentially just private keys, and that's what they are. So when people use the wallet, they get what we call a Statecoin address. They send their Bitcoin onto it, and then now they can move around these private keys. So obviously there's a lot of funky cryptography going behind. There's a lot of engineering that's happened to make that work. But essentially, that's what we have. We're moving around UTXOs. So that there's limitations there, as you can imagine. If I have 0.75 Bitcoin on my Statecoin, I can only send you 0.75.
Yeah.
We can't break that up.
Okay, so you're actually transforming Bitcoin back into a Chaumian cash-like system. Is that right? With bills,
Yeah,
with specific denominations. So this is Bitcoin cash.
Well, funny enough, people ask us, why did we build this in the first place? It wasn't with privacy in mind. I think I've told you, I was working with a few institutions that were looking at discrete log contracts, which, there's something nice about those because it's a kind of like a trustless way to get into a contract. Like a kind of a financial bet. But one of the issues with discrete log contracts is they're very capital inefficient. If me and you were to bet on the Bitcoin price next week, we both have to have our funds locked in until next week. With Statechains, you in theory could novate your contract or your side of the bet. So that's when we started like kind of looking deep into Statechains, and then it's like one of those. It's like you go down the rabbit hole, you think, oh, this is pretty cool tech. And we were at the time, I think at the time the CoinSwap paper came out, or I think somebody did some noise about CoinSwap. We thought, well, maybe this is a better way of doing privacy or a different way of doing privacy. And that's how it kind of happened.
So I like the OpenDime analogy because I love opendimes. I'm like one of the world's biggest consumers of opendimes, I think. That's an exaggeration, but I do love them. I gave one to Lex Friedman on his podcast. He seemed to like it. They're really great for gifts because the whole point is, I mean, they're good for gifts if the recipient of your gift is incredibly paranoid and doesn't trust you, the gift giver, which is like kind of like, well, if they don't trust you and you're giving someone a present, like you've probably kind of a weird relationship with them in the first place. But because I guess you could always just give someone a paper wallet and they trust that you haven't retained the the private key. But yeah, so for those who aren't aware, opendimes are a physical bearer instrument. You put some Bitcoin, you load it on, and you can obviously transfer the USB stick any number of times in meat space in the analog world. And they can only be redeemed once, and you have to kind of like break it to get the Bitcoins out. And so what you're saying is this, your Statechain system is similar to this. You load up some Bitcoin into Statechains, and then you can transfer that claim on that Bitcoin an arbitrary number of times off-chain, and then ultimately, you can redeem it on-chain. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there are limitations there. So we use for something. I mean, you can't send it an unlimited amount of times. We have this kind of lock time where we decrement. So at some point, because we wanted to make this non-custodial, so when you do when you do have this, when you create the Statecoin, you have like a backout transaction. So if anything was to happen to the server, you would still be able to broadcast your transaction back onto the Bitcoin blockchain. So that's where we say I don't want to get into debate if are we truly non-custodial, but we're definitely not censorship resistant. If we were to be shut down, you couldn't move those state coins anymore. But if we were to be shut down, you'd be able to pull them out with a backup transaction. But every time a backup transaction is generated, we kind of like call this incrementing lock time. We basically, there's a period where that backup transaction can work, say 6 months, that kind of gets decremented each time. And that's to save us. This is to protect like previous owners being able to steal your funds. Yeah, there's a period of time where previous owner couldn't take your funds. And then after a certain period of time, a previous owner could, in theory, seize your funds. But you could stop that with a, kind of like a watchtower approach similar to Lightning. But we don't think that's a great UI experience. So we're basically going to suggest that people work within this period of time. And then once that period of time is exercised, you either go back to the Bitcoin network to basically, or you pull out and don't rely on watchers. So it's not unlimited.
And the anonymity set is everybody that has contributed coins to the state chain for that duration.
Yeah, so I mean, people can create state chains, create state coins of the any domination they prefer. We would obviously have a coin swap protocol which suggests 0.1 Bitcoin, 1 Bitcoin, 0.001 Bitcoin, similar to what you see with coinjoins. And we would coordinate people to meet other people willing to swap, and then there would be some sort of kind of mixing process, and that's blinded.
So you would you want people to do a coin join on the way into a state chain? Is that the idea?
There's no reason why they could, but they could if we don't force them into it. We expect most people just to come in with a naked Bitcoin or a naked UTXO and then basically do a few swaps and then pull out.
And how do you guarantee, the transmission of a UTXO or private key, without obviously doing an on-chain transaction? How does that actually mechanically work?
So when you create a state coin address, where we use something called two-party ECDSA, which essentially we have a key share and yourself would have a key share. So it's basically, are you familiar with MPC? It's using kind of MPC type protocol. So essentially there's two keys for this one key itself. And you as the owner of your state coin, you need to cooperate with us to move that key. And on the back end, we do have a key server that's kind of doing that for us. So it's approving the transaction. And it's every time you move around, we generate a new key share. And you kind of have to trust us to delete the keys. So, there is an element of trust there with us. We are using Intel SGX to prove we've deleted the key. But I would like to say that, it's not a core part of our protocol. It's kind of like a nice to have to show that we're behaving honestly. Because even if we didn't delete the keys, in theory, a previous owner could cooperate with us. So we use Intel SGX to prove that we actually did delete the key. If that makes sense.
So there's definitely some key trust assumptions. You've laid out a few of them. There's some key trust assumptions in this process. And I feel that you're being pretty transparent about them. Do you feel that users will, find this compelling given, the existence of some of these sort of trust caveats?
Potentially, because I think initial users probably won't use it that much to move around UTXOs. They're probably going to come in, do a few swaps, and then come out. So those key issues, no pun intended, aren't really an issue for the short-term user because, they're kind of protected in that sense. Long-term, potentially, but then again, we are publishing our data. We are using a secure enclave in Intel SGX to prove we've deleted. And even so, we can never steal the funds. We could potentially cooperate with a previous user. But there's, everyone would know that would have happened because of the way the protocol works. So we'd essentially have to shut down. Well, we'd essentially be shut down at that point.
Is there an element of you as in CommerceBlock, the maintainer or the coordinator in this system? Is there an element of a data honeypot? Like, do you have data on users that a third party would try and acquire?
No, we publish everything everywhere and it's open. So they would have that data anyway. Okay. And we expect users to come in via Tor, but there's nothing that is not public anyway. It's kind of designed that way. So
do you see this as basically a competitor and a different approach to, the Wasabi Samurais of the world, or kind of a completely new system that, the dominant usage initially will be for privacy?
I think it's another layer 2 solution where privacy will be one of its features. You could argue and say that Liquid from Blockstream is that. I mean, they certainly support confidential transactions. I don't think many people use it for that, but that's more the way I see it. I mean, I think I've mentioned it to you previously. People are talking about, commingling state chains with lightning channels as well, because these are essentially private keys that we're sending around. there's nothing to suggest these private keys wouldn't be Lightning channels. So, I mean, this could be an early implementation of channel factories, for example, which was kind of proposed. But no, I see it as a layer 2 solution. It has some trade-offs. It's not censorship resistant, but it is non-custodial in our view, and it kind of maybe fits in between Lightning and Bitcoin in that sense. So maybe it's a layer 1.5 or something.
Yeah, because there's an obvious scalability point to be made here. What you're enabling is the off-chain transfer of ownership of Bitcoins effectively. And, that's a clear scalability win. I mean, I guess it's not an unlimited scalability gain, but it's really material, and especially as it pertains to Lightning, where you've got all these loop-in and rebalancing transactions that you have to do. I think it pairs nicely with Lightning, because the more on-chain transactions you have to do with Lightning, the kind of like more inefficient it gets, and like the more the fee burden starts to reduce the usefulness of the system. So it seems to pair well with it.
Yeah, and that's certainly when we've had very high level I wouldn't say whiteboard sessions because we work remote with COVID, but we've had some very high level thoughts about how it could integrate with Lightning. On paper, it looks easy, but then you can imagine moving a Lightning channel around, preserving all the backup states of the Lightning channel. It is messy, but I think it's where we're going to lean to post going live.
So what is your, kind of zooming out a little bit, what are your thoughts on the state of scalability for Bitcoin? I mean, obviously there's, we talked about a whole bunch of different solutions and approaches here today. I mean, how optimistic do you feel about it? Are you feeling good about the Bitcoin kind of scalability prospects?
Well, I think the market is saying yes. We're clearly in a bull run, and the transaction fees are still somewhat manageable. And Lightning's been slow to develop, but it's definitely picking up steam. And I think that I think as transaction fees go higher, things like Liquid will probably see more attention. So will Lightning, and I think we hopefully want to be part of that as well. So I think it's positive. I mean, and let's be honest, a lot of people are going to have Bitcoin and probably keep it on a somewhat centralized platform. So for non-custodial people, I think that there are options now, which there probably wasn't a few years ago.
So what's the timeline for the Statechains rollout? Where are you in the process?
Yeah, so I said we're in test. I mean, I'd say we're code complete, but lots of UI bugs still. We're hoping to have a soft launch to show at Bitcoin Miami. We have someone there that's going to present it, hopefully at Bitcoin at BitDevs. Not myself, no one from, it's still hard to travel, but we'll have someone in Miami that will present it, and we hope to have some sort of soft launch to kind of show it. But the wallet works, you can play with it. It's a bit buggy, but it's there. The concepts are working, which is kind of exciting for us. It's been a long journey, but everything was built from the ground up. This is what was kind of very interesting about this is no one built Statechain before, so everything was new. So it's been quite exciting.
Yeah, it is very exciting to track. Obviously, I've been following your work for a long time, including Mainstay. Nick, thanks so much for coming on. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the launch of Statechains.
Thanks for having us.